The morning I knew I was done being polite, I walked out my front door and saw the HOA president standing in my driveway screaming into her phone like I'd just committed a felony, her SUV parked sideways across my concrete, blocking my car in completely, while my rescue Rottweiler Thunder sat calmly at the edge of the driveway like a bouncer who'd had enough of VIPs cutting the line. She wasn't calling animal control, she wasn't calling the HOA board, she was calling 911 on me, because my dog wouldn't move, so she could use my private driveway as her personal parking space one more time. What she didn't know was that by that point I had cameras on every angle, a folder full of receipts, and a whole lot of built-up frustration from months of her treating my home like an extension of her kingdom, and that this little scene in my driveway was about to blow up in a way she did not see coming. My name's Ethan. I work from home in IT consulting, and when I first bought my place in Maple Grove Landing almost 9 years ago, it felt like I'd finally stepped into the life I'd been grinding toward for years. You know what I mean? I'd eaten enough cheap frozen dinners and driven enough beat-up cars to afford that down payment. And when I signed those papers, I was proud like every shingle on that roof, every maple tree in that yard, every inch of that driveway was mine. Not the bank's, not my landlord's, mine. The neighborhood looked like a postcard, kids on bikes, people walking dogs in the evenings, sprinklers ticking away at sunset. Yeah, there was an HOA, but at the beginning it was just background noise, a newsletter about community BBQs, a reminder to bring your trash cans in. Nothing that made me think, hey, this thing is going to try to run my life. For the first few years, I barely thought about it. I kept my yard trimmed, my music low, my trash where it was supposed to be, and I honestly believed that if I did my part and minded my business, everyone else would mind theirs too. Then Dana moved in. If you've ever met a real HOA Karen, you already know her energy before I even describe it. She rolled into Maple Grove Landing like we should all be grateful she chose our little development out of all the places in the world, and within a couple months, she somehow landed the role of HOA president. After that, you could spot her anywhere. Reflective vest on clipboard in hand, sunglasses glued to her face, even when the sun was going down, walking the neighborhood like a self-appointed inspector general. At first it was death by email. Long messages about visual harmony along the curb line, because someone's trash can was visible from the street for more than 7 minutes after pickup warnings that certain garden lights were too warm-toned for the community aesthetic. She even moved my neighbor's flower pots a few inches because she felt they weren't balanced. It was annoying, sure, but I laughed it off, told myself. Yeah, every HOA has that one overzealous person, just let her burn herself out. I wish that had been the end of it. The real problem started with my driveway. The first time Dana parked in it, I honestly thought it was just a moving, weak mix-up. I looked out the window, and there was this white SUV sitting squarely in the middle of my driveway facing my garage like it belonged there. I walked outside, knocked on the window with a smile that was more confused than angry, and said, I think you pulled into the wrong driveway, this one's mine. She didn't look embarrassed. She didn't apologize. She just shrugged and said, I'll only be a minute. Like that settled it. I stood there for a second waiting for her to start the car, and back out she didn't. So I swallowed. It told myself move in. Week is stressful. Ethan, don't turn this into a thing. Except it didn't stop after a week, or 2, or 3. It became a pattern. I'd come home from the store, and she'd be sprawled across my driveway like her SUV was part of the landscaping. Some days I couldn't pull in. Some days, I couldn't get out. And every time I confronted her, I got the same dismissive wave. And I'll be just a minute in that tone that really meant your time doesn't matter as much as mine. And here's the thing. That strip of concrete isn't just concrete. When you've spent years clawing your way to afford it, it's a symbol. It's your space, your boundary. And having someone park there like it's a public street over and over does something to you. Inside, it makes you feel like you're... No, doesn't count. I tried being diplomatic, I really did. One Saturday morning, I caught her as she was walking past and said, "Look, Dana, I don't want to make this a big deal, but driveways are privately owned here. The CCNRs spell it out. I'd appreciate it if you didn't park in mine anymore." I even printed out the page, highlighted the line, slid it under her door with a polite note. A couple days later, I got an email from her that said, "As HOA president, I have temporary access rights for community tasks. Homeowners are expected to be flexible for the greater good." That phrase, "for the greater good," hit me like a red flag in bold letters. I filed a formal complaint with the board, thinking, all right, there's a system, use it. That's what it's there for. But the board turned out to be Dana and two people who liked the feeling of sitting behind a folding table, and the response I got back said that I was being territorial and that occasional shared use of driveways fosters neighborly cohesion. Translation: we're not going to check her, so you just need to get over it. I started to feel like I was losing my mind, like I lived in an upside-down world where basic property lines were up for debate, and I kept telling myself it would blow over until the Tuesday that it didn't. That morning, I had a huge virtual meeting with a potential client. One of those calls that could change the year if it went well. I woke up early, went over my slides, put on a button-down. Even though I work from home, because it made me feel sharp, grabbed my bag and headed for the door with 10 minutes to spare, planning to drive to a co-working space where the internet was rock solid. I opened the door, looked up, and my stomach dropped. Her SUV was parked so close to my garage door, there was no way to get my car out without driving straight through hers. I knocked on her door. No answer. I texted nothing. I called straight to voicemail, and by the time she finally wandered back with a latte, I was on the edge. "Dana, I have to leave now." "You're blocking my car," I said, trying to stay level. She glanced at my driveway, then at me with this lazy look and said, "Calm down. You weren't going anywhere. Your lights were off. What are you talking about?" "I have a meeting," I snapped, and that wasn't like me. I don't snap easily, but I could feel my shot at that contract evaporating. "You can't keep doing this." She tilted her head like she was correcting a child. "I'm the HOA president." "Ethan, I'm allowed to use spaces temporarily for community business." "What community business involves trapping me in my own driveway?" I asked, and she just waved her hand. "You're being dramatic. I missed the meeting. The client hired somebody else, and that night I sat at my dining table staring at my laptop, feeling this tight, bruised kind of anger in my chest. Not just because of the money, but because I had let someone treat my home, and me, like I didn't matter. That's the night I opened a new folder on my computer and named it Maple Grove Circus. I started dropping in screenshots, photos of her SUV blocking my driveway, copies of every email I told myself if she wants to play with rules and authority. Fine, I'll bring facts and receipts. And in the middle of all that frustration, a different idea popped into my head. I'd always wanted a dog. I'd put it off because of work travel life. But now I found myself scrolling through shelter websites, looking specifically at big working breeds, shepherds, mastiffs, Rottweilers. Not because I wanted a weapon, but because I wanted presence, something you couldn't gaslight or talk over. That's how I found Thunder, this huge black and tan Rottweiler with these steady eyes that didn't look scared or hyper, just aware, like he'd seen some things and was still standing. The description said, protective, loyal, disciplined, not for first-time owners. I drove to the shelter, walked into his kennel, and he didn't jump up or go wild. He just walked over, sniffed my hand, and leaned his shoulder against my leg like he was saying, "So what's the job?" Taking him home felt like signing a new contract with myself. No more letting people steamroll me. We pulled into my driveway. I opened the car door and Thunder hopped out. Sniffed the air. Walked the perimeter of the driveway like he was checking the walls of a fortress. Then sat right at the edge of the concrete facing the street, like he'd been waiting his whole life to guard this exact strip of pavement. "That's your spot," I told him, "good boy." And his tail gave one solid thump. I installed motion cameras, moved my doorbell cam to get a perfect view of the driveway, and put up a sign that said, "Private driveway. No unauthorized parking. Video recording in use." Was it a bit much? Sure, but being subtle had gotten me nowhere. For the first time in a long time, I went to bed feeling like I wasn't totally helpless. 2 days later, Thunder lifted his head in the living room, walked to the window, and I knew before I even looked that Dana's SUV was coming. I stepped out on the porch. Thunder walked down to the very edge of the driveway and planted himself like a statue. And sure enough, her SUV rolled down the street and angled in, like it had a reserved sign. She didn't see me at first. She only saw Thunder when her front tires were inches from his paws, and she slammed on the brakes. She stared at him. He stared back. She rolled her window down and snapped, "Move your dog, Ethan." I leaned on the railing and said, "He's on my property." Dana, and unlike some people, he respects boundaries. Her mouth tightened. "I have HOA business. I need quick access. You've got your own driveway for that." I said, "This one's done being borrowed." "This is harassment." She fired back. "You trained that animal to intimidate me. I trained my dog to guard the place he lives." I said, keeping my voice calm, which includes this driveway. Thunder took exactly one step forward, not lunging, not barking, just shifting his weight, so he was more solidly planted in her path, and you'd have thought he'd jumped through her windshield from the way she jerked back. Her hand shot to her phone. "I'm calling the police. She said you're using a dangerous dog to threaten an HOA officer." I just shrugged and said, "Go ahead." Then stepped back toward the house, because at that point I knew my cameras were rolling, and honestly, I wanted everything on record. When the patrol cars pulled up, lights flashing, Thunder sat next to me on the porch with his leash on posture, calm but alert. Dana rushed the officers with her story, pointing at Thunder like he was a monster, saying he'd lunged, that I'd set him on her, the whole 9 yards. One officer looked at Thunder, then at me, and said, "Does your dog have a history of aggression, sir?" "No," I said, handing over his adoption and training papers, and everything she's describing is on my cameras. A few minutes later, they were watching the footage, and there it was in full color, her SUV rolling forward. Thunder simply walking to the edge of my driveway and standing there, her slamming on the brakes. No lunge, no jump, no bark. The officer blew out a slow breath and said to his partner, "Yeah, that's not aggression." When Dana heard that, something in her cracked. She started yelling that they were biased, that as HOA president, she had authority over community spaces, and the officer cut her off with "Ma'am, HOA rules. Do not override private property rights. He has every right to put his dog on his driveway, and you reported an active dog attack, that did not happen. Misusing 911 is a separate issue. Then he pulled out his ticket book. Watching him write that citation felt like the universe finally saying, "No. Actually, you're not crazy. This is wrong." Yeah, that happened. After that, the neighborhood got really interested really fast. People started hanging out on their porches a little more, asking casual questions on walks like, "So everything okay with the HOA in that tone that says they already know it's not?" A few days later, Mark, one of the quieter board members, pulled up in the HOA golf cart and asked if we could talk. We walked the cul-de-sac, thunder trotting between us, and Mark admitted, Look, Ethan, what she did with your driveway and that 911 call, it's not an isolated thing. She's been pushing people around for a while. A lot of folks just didn't want to deal with the drama. He told me the board was calling an emergency meeting without her and asked if I'd be willing to tell my side with all the evidence I had. That night, I walked into the clubhouse with my Maple Grove Circus folder, and the place was packed. People who usually kept their heads down were there, arms crossed, faces tight. And when they called on me, I told the story from the beginning. The first time she parked in my driveway, the emails, the fake greater good. The day I missed my meeting, the cameras, the 911 call. The footage. I laid printouts on the table so nobody could say it was just my word against hers. When I finished, there was this pause, like everyone was taking in the fact that it wasn't just their own little run-in. It was a pattern. And then the room erupted in a good way. People started standing up one after another, sharing their own stories about petty fines and threats. A retired couple fined because their hose lay across the lawn too long. A young mom whose kid's car almost got towed for parking exactly where the rules allowed someone else whose welcome mat had been labeled passive-aggressive. You could feel the mood shift from isolated frustration to collective, "We've had enough." The board voted to suspend her as HOA president, pending a full review, and the result was basically unanimous. I didn't cheer. I just sat there feeling this weird mix of relief and dread, because I knew how much she needed that title, and I knew people like her don't just shrug and move on. They come back swinging. And she did. Over the next week, her SUV started appearing across the street from my house engine, off her sitting inside, staring at my driveway like it had personally betrayed her. Strange cars I didn't recognize cruised past my place a little too slowly. One night around 11, Thunder growled low in his chest and walked to the front window, hackles up. I peeked through the blinds and saw Dana standing at the edge of my property line in the dark, holding a camera and a stack of papers. When the motion light came on, she squinted, then started taking pictures. My security sign, my cameras, the angle of my fence, like she was building some kind of case. I opened the door and said, "Dana, it's 11 at night. What are you doing on my property?" She turned around with this wild look in her eyes and said, "Gathering evidence for your violations. You think what happened at that meeting is the end of this. It's temporary. When I'm reinstated, I'm rewriting the rules if I have to." Thunder stepped forward, planting himself between us, and she immediately took a step back. "This needs to stop," I told her, and she just shook her head, voice shaking. "It stops." When I say it stops, that's when I realized we weren't just dealing with HOA drama anymore. We were dealing with obsession. The board realized it too. After another round of reports and a bunch of documentation, the county opened an inquiry into her whole tenure. Every citation, every complaint, every ugly little thing people had been too tired or scared to fight before. My footage and emails went from being my personal backup to evidence in a real investigation. The final straw came one night, when she showed up again this time, with a tape measure pacing off my driveway, and muttering under her breath while she filmed on her phone, convinced she was going to prove I was out of compliance. I stepped out Thunder right beside me and asked, "What exactly do you think you're doing now?" She said I had been manipulating the neighborhood, turning people against her, using my dog as a weapon, and as she's ranting, a patrol car rolls slowly down the street. Before I can say a word, she marches straight into the road, waving her arms and yelling at the officer to arrest me, saying I'm stalking her, that Thunder is attacking her, that I'm recording her illegally. The officer gets out, tells her to step back and calm down. She refuses. Her voice keeps climbing, and then she shoves him. Not a hard shove, but enough. You could feel the whole neighborhood hold its breath. Porch lights flipped on, blinds cracked. People were watching this go down in real time. The officers moved in restrained. Her told her to stop resisting, and she kept yelling my name like I'd somehow made all of this happen. "Dana," I said loud enough for her, and everyone listening. "I didn't make you do any of this. You did." They put her in the cruiser, and this time she didn't look defiant. She just looked lost, like she genuinely couldn't understand how her world had stopped revolving around what she wanted. A few days later, the board held one last meeting. The county's findings. The police reports the videos, all of it was laid out, and the vote to permanently remove her from any HOA position and void a stack of her citations wasn't even close. They apologized to me publicly for not stepping in sooner, which felt strange, but also kind of necessary. And as I walked home with Thunder at my side and saw my driveway empty quiet completely, realized this whole mess had taught me something I wish I'd learned sooner. It's not just about concrete or bylaws, it's about boundaries, the invisible kind that say, "This is my space, this is my time, this is my dignity," and what happens when you let someone chip away at them because you don't want to be dramatic. People like Dana don't usually stop because you shout at them. They stop when you document, you stand your ground, and you refuse to accept their chaos as normal life. So now I'm curious what you think. Did I handle it right? Did I go too far? Not far enough. Do you think HOAs are useful guardrails, or just magnets for people who want small doses of power to feel big? If you've ever dealt with a nightmare neighbor, a petty boss, a family member, or an HOA president who thought your boundaries were optional, tell me about it in the comments. I want to hear where you draw the line and what you did when someone tried to cross it. And if this story hit a nerve for you, hit like, hit subscribe, and share it with that one friend who rolls their eyes every time the letters HOA show up in their mailbox.